A/B testing or split testing is generally a user experience research methodology. Split testing or A/B testing normally consists of a randomized experiment with two or more variants. So here in this example, we have two upstreams, A and B. So let's just imagine we're building an e-commerce website and we have two designs for our pay portal, and we're not too sure which one would be more successful. So we set up two containers here with our e-commerce website, and we place design A in this container A here, and then we use design 2 in this B container. So we have two exactly the same setups here, except for we have a slightly different design on each of our containers here. So what we do now is we set up Nginx to split the traffic between the two containers, A and B. So we now have a scenario where half of the users that come to our website will see container A or design A, and then we have half of the users will then see B. So they'll be sent to the B upstream here and see the B design. Of course, we then measure to see which is more successful, and then potentially we have a better idea of how to move our website design forward. So that's just one example of many examples that you might want to utilize this for. But in this tutorial, we are going to learn how to configure Nginx to distribute or split incoming traffic between upstream groups based upon some sort of request characteristic that we can choose from. So we will start from a baseline code. So there is some expectation that you already understand some of the code that will be presented, and we'll work from there. So it would be advisable for you to watch the previous tutorials in this series if you are a little bit stuck with the base code that we start from. If you haven't found the other tutorials in this series, just go over to the main channel, look for Nginx Mastery in the playlist, and then you'll find the rest of the tutorials in this series. So in addition to that, if you do want to follow along step by step, you are going to need Docker installed, and here I'm using Visual Studio Code. So we do start from a baseline in this tutorial, and there is a link in the video description to that code, and I'll guide you through that shortly. That won't take too long. Once that's done, I'm going to give you a little grounding into the split client mechanism and how that works in Nginx. And then we'll move over to two configurations. We'll start from a very basic configuration, configuring static sites. So we'll just utilize the Nginx default directory to configure a split client setup. And then we'll move across over to our reverse proxy, which we've been working on in the previous tutorials, and then look how we can apply it to that. Again, this configuration is using Docker, so you will need Docker Desktop installed if you want to follow along. Before we start, just a big thank you to everyone who has been following the channel so far. If you would like to support us further, then please do by joining us as a channel member or following us on Patreon. And don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on any of our socials. All the links, just have a look in the main channel and go to the About Us page. You'll find all the links there. In order to configure the split client module, we need to configure two parameters, the unique ID and splitting percentage. The split percentage is probably self-explanatory. Here we're going to define how much traffic is sent to, in this case, A, and how much traffic is sent to B. So in our scenario, we're going to set it as 50-50. A/B or split testing is an experiment, so we need to ensure that there is consistency. So generally, you don't want to have a scenario whereby user A, for example, has been designated bucket A or server A, starts to go through that process, then all of a sudden they refresh the page, and then all of a sudden they're switched over to B. A unique ID in this scenario is utilized to try and uniquely identify that user so they're placed within a bucket and then served the same server every time they visit your site. Now, there is some consideration here because a unique ID, we might set that up as an IP address, for example. But the problem is here, there are obviously lots of occasions where people share the same IP address. So for example, inside of a company, they potentially would have the same external IP address. So potentially an IP address isn't the way to go here for a unique ID. Maybe we need to buddy that up with maybe a cookie or some other parameters. So that's kind of out of the scope of this tutorial, but that is something to consider when you are developing your unique ID. So I'm going to stop there in terms of talking about the mechanics. That is something that I can pick up in an individual tutorial where we go and deep dive into the actual mechanics of that. But I think we have enough information now to move on. So let's go ahead and download the base code, and then we'll go ahead and apply the new configurations. There is a link in the video description which will take you to this folder here, the code for this tutorial series. We are going to be utilizing part 4. So go ahead and download this and open that up in a new folder, open that in Visual Studio Code, and that's where I'm going to meet you next. So part 4 code, that's where we're going to start from. So once downloaded the base code, there is a commands file here, and I've been trying to update some of the commands that we've been utilizing. So if I am a little bit quick, you can go ahead and just copy and paste the commands from here. So the first thing that we need to do then, just to get this running, we do have a Django project here. That just allows us to showcase the features that we're trying to learn. So let's create a new folder here. It starts with .env. We just need a environment variable set up. We're going to create a new file here. We're going to call that dev.env. This is something I needed to sort out. Apologies. It's a bit boring doing this every single time. But there's 3 different things here. Secret key, allowed host, and debug 1. If you have a look at this tutorial's code, if you don't want to type that out, you don't need to type all of this out. You can just type in something like that. And in actual fact, you only need 127 here for this tutorial. So that's pretty much all you need in this file for this tutorial. But like I said, check out the code for this tutorial and just copy and paste it in. So like I said, that's just so that we can start the instance of Django. You can ignore that now. So we have a Docker Compose file here, which consists of all the different containers that we want to run. So there's nothing here we need to do. I'm just going to remove some of this, tidy up a little bit for this tutorial. So there's nothing we need to do here other than to start this up and to check to make sure that it's working. So you will need Docker desktop or Docker installed to run this. So let's go ahead and do that. So Docker Compose, or actually, Docker Compose, and then up, and that should bring up then the containers. So I just need to start Docker desktop. 1 second. So I've started Docker. You can see there's no images or containers. Starting completely from fresh here. So let's go back down here. Now I do have the Docker extension also installed in Visual Studio Code. If you've not seen that before, that gives me access to the containers and images. Can make life a little bit easier. So Docker Compose up, that should then build and run the containers without any errors. And then we should be able to access the web service, which should now be running. There we go. So to start us off, we're just going to go ahead and build some static web pages hosted by Nginx, and then we go ahead and split clients there just to get a feel of that. And then we just apply this to our reverse proxy, and we'll create 2 instances or 2 containers of Django, and then we'll split test between those containers. So let's do the static site first. So we do have some volumes mapped across to make it easier for us. So Nginx, here we have our configuration file, our default config. So this is where we're going to work from. We can remove some of these different configurations here. And then we'll keep this one for later. So just comment that out, and then we'll work from the top. If you remember, we have 2 parameters that we need to set here. The unique ID or string, and then the actual percentages that we want to split. So here we're going to bring in the split client module. And then first of all, we need to define our string, which essentially is going to be a string which is going to be utilized within an algorithm. So here we're going to define the remote address. So we're going to try and essentially identify users via their IP address. And we're going to utilize that within our algorithm to determine whether they should be split to A or B variant of our server. So secondly, then we need to set up our actual percentages, our split percentages. So we set up a variable here. I've just called it test variant, which we're going to utilize in our location to determine then, or to point towards our split clients. So we'll see that shortly. So here we just need to now determine our percentages. So let's go for 50%. And then we are using static here, static site. So we're going to direct them to where the home page is going to be for this. So we're going to set up a new folder inside of home called HTML, and then a new folder called v1. And then everyone else, so everyone else is going to be sent to the second address, which is going to be home HTML and then version 2. Now, don't forget the syntax here. We're going to need some semicolons right here. So now let's apply this. So inside of our server block, we simply just need to now define the port we're going to listen on, and then our location block here. So our root directory here. So we're going to say root and then $, and then that's going to be test variant, and then we're going to define the page's index.html. Okay, right, so that pretty much is it. So we're just basically going to define the root directory when people visit our web page, and then we've hooked that up to our split client variable here. So essentially Nginx is going to take over, determine from the string, utilizing an algorithm, basically going to then determine whether this user is going to be directed to the version 1 or the version 2 of our web page. Right, so this needs to exist. So just very quickly then, we're going to go into the Nginx Dockerfile here. We're just going to extend this slightly. We're just going to, when we run our containers, we're just going to make 2 new folders here. So home HTML v1, and then we're going to create a new folder here in v2. Now we are traversing folders, so we're going to use the p flag for that. Right, so that's going to set up those folders there when we create our new Nginx image and container. So now we need to add something inside of that. So let's just go ahead and create 2 new folders, v1. This is inside of the Nginx folder here, v1 and v2. And then inside of here, let's go ahead and create a new file, index.html, and we'll call this version 1. And then we'll do the same thing again in v2. We'll call that version 2. So we have 2 separate web pages here, which we're going to serve. Half of our users are going to be sent to version 1, half of our users are going to be sent to version 2. So that is available in our containers, we're going to utilize a volume to do that. So let's just go ahead and add 2 new volumes here very simply. So we're just going to map across those folders, Nginx v1, over to our new folder that we've created, home HTML1, and the same thing again for version 2. So just before we rebuild, let's just go back to the configuration before we start this, because there's a few issues here. You may have spotted them. So we're going to need to use curly braces here. Put some curly braces. Otherwise, we're going to get a variable issue, I believe, or there'll be an issue here. And then in addition to that, we are going to need the semicolon here after listen. So those are 2 things that we need to change there. You may have already spotted them. So once you've done that, let's go back into Docker. Go ahead and delete the containers. You can do this manually, or you can use prune just to remove all these. I'm assuming that you may not have any experience using Docker Desktop, so I'm just trying to keep it nice and simple. So let's remove everything there. So we removed all the images and containers. So we'll start this up again. So we'll run the Docker Compose up. And then here, like I said, I've got the extension here in Visual Studio Code. That should give us some indication when the containers are ready without having to go back into Docker Desktop. All good. So everything now is running nicely. So it's just now a case of testing this out. So back in the browser, let's just refresh, and you can see that we are presented with version 1. You can just about see that. I won't zoom in, but you can you see it, version 1. So we're presented with version 1. Now, obviously, if you're following the code intently, you'll probably see that it isn't actually going to work for version 2 because we haven't set it up properly. We need a slash, there's a dot here, so there's a syntax error there in my code at least. So that wouldn't work anyway. It would produce a 404 if it were to present or select this option. Okay, so at this point, what we could do is we could close the container down, restart it again, test it again. That's one way we could test this out, of course. But another way, and something else that we can do, is we can pass a token through, and then we can obviously change that token every time we make a request, thus kind of simulating a unique request to test out to see if we can then access or whether it is going to split into these two different options. So there's many ways that we can do this. So first of all then, let's just change the IP address. We're going to pass in a token and utilize that. So we're going to pass that in, and then that's going to be used in the algorithm to then select the bucket and what version it then presents to the users. So what we can do here is we can use curl. So here in the Mac at least, I'm using curl, and I'm going to send a request to my endpoint, which is 127.0.0.1, and then I'm going to pass in a token. So our token is called token. That's a reference point there. And then we're just going to send in a pass random token. And you can see this actually returns an error. Okay, so that's because I've just made this change here and I haven't restarted. So go back into here. I'm just going to restart the server. That would take the new configuration. So let's just try that again. And there we go. So here I'm now selecting and returning version 2. So that's the HTML code that's being passed in here. I can see it there, version 2. So if I change my token, so let's just change the token to that. So let's just change the token to 1. You can see here I'm returning version 1. Let's just simulate a new user by changing that to 2. And you can see I'm returning version 1. So I'm going to keep changing my token, and now you can see that I'm returning the version 2. So here's just simulating different users, and you can see that we are being split. And remember, this is the HTML code in the HTML page, version 1 and version 2. So I'm just passing that back, and that's how I can see whether I'm accessing version 1 or version 2 of the website. I can simulate that obviously in my browser by just typing in the token and the name of the token. So 8, so I'm getting version 1 here. So there we go. So now I've got version 2. So there we have a basic setup using static sites. So let's go ahead now and configure that with our reverse proxy. So this is in general our setup. You can ignore the cache here, but essentially what we have here is a browser connecting to our Nginx container, and then we have another container that's running gUnicorn and Django. So what we're going to do here is we're going to basically make a different or a new container, which is essentially just a copy and paste of this container. And then that's going to give us 2 containers. And then we're going to set up Nginx to pass over to one container or the other container. So we're going to set up our A/B test, sending upstream to the first container or the second container. So we're going to end up with something like this for this example. So our Nginx server is going to pass over to the upstream to the first container or the second container, and they're going to have slightly different web pages or show slightly different web pages. So let's start off by going back to our configuration file here in the Nginx folder. We'll just set this up. So I'll just highlight that out, and we'll bring back in the code we had previously. I will bring back the code. There we go. And then this code here, then it corresponds to our upstream Django container. Apologies for the jumping around. Okay, so that's what we had before. So essentially what we need to do here is create 2 upstreams. So upstream, we'll call this demo 1. And then we'll create a new upstream for our second container, Django container 2. And then we'll just pass in a different port to differentiate between the different containers. So that's going to be our second container is going to be working on port 8080. Right, so now we can set up our split client. And then this time we'll do the same thing as we did previously. We'll pass in a token so that we can kind of simulate the idea of different clients. And then we'll create our variable. We'll just call this variant this time. And then we're set up so that 50% of our clients will go to demo 1, and then everyone else, 50%, will go to demo 2. So that's a reference here to our upstream name. So all we need to do now is change our proxy pass. So at the moment it's going to demo only. Obviously now we have this variable variant. So we just need to define variant here, and then that's going to split depending on the token that we pass over to demo 1 or demo 2 upstream. And these upstreams correlate to our containers. So we're passing data up to our Django containers on these ports. So now we just need to set up a new container. So let's do that. So we have the initial instance of Django. So we're going to call that web1. And then we call this web2. So we're just going to build 2 containers now. So in this case, what we're going to do is create a different context. So we're going to create a different folder. So we have a Django folder here. So we're just going to copy and paste that folder and make a few changes. So we need to make sure we're binding to port 8080 for our second instance here. I think that's, and we need to expose port 8080 there as well. Okay, so I think that's pretty much all we need to do there. Other than that, we need to make sure we're mapping across the right volume. So we're going to create a new folder in a second, Django 2. Yep, and I think that's all that we need to do there. Okay, so I'm going to make a new folder. Just going to copy the Django folder and then rename it Django 2. So that's our second instance of Django. Now, in order for us to identify the fact that this is a new instance, we're going to need something to identify this as our new instance. So what I'm going to do here in our Django, if you're not familiar with this, don't worry. We're going to create a new folder called templates. Yep, and then inside of that, we're going to create a new file called index.html, and then I'm going to call this variant 2. Okay, so it's just going to serve the variant 2. The first Django is going to serve the default Django page, and then the second instance is going to serve variant 2. Actually, let's just go into this Django here. We may as well. Let's create a new folder, templates. So into the first instance, let's just create a template here as well. We may as well. Index.html, and then we'll call this variant 1. There we go. Right, so we have templates now in both of our Django folders here. And now what we need to do is to set up our URL. So inside the demo, our main project folder, if you're not familiar with Django, we have the URLs file here. We can get rid of all that. And then in here, what we want to do is we just want to set up a path to that template. So let's do that. So we're going to build a split test. So I've just copy and paste that in. I realize that. So let's get rid of that. So there we go. So we're going to use a template view just to serve this page. You can see what we're doing here is we're going to serve the index page. That's what we're going to do. That's the template. So whenever we go to this URL, we're going to serve that page. That's pretty much all that's happening there. So just make sure you bring in template view and then add the new path. And then what we can do is we can just copy this, close that, and then go to our second instance, Django 2 here, go to demo, URLs, and do exactly the same thing again there. So I've just copy and pasted that in. There we go. So that's the same now. And then in addition to that, we just need to make sure that in the settings, so let's start with the top Django, demo, settings, we just need to make sure in here that we're passing over the directory where the templates are. So let's go down to DIRs and set up our base directory. So that's just telling Django that we've got this template folder here and define the templates in there. So that's in Django here, and I'll do exactly the same thing in Django 2. In settings. Okay, so I'd close everything down. So that's everything now sorted. So at this point, we have now configured Nginx to serve those two different upstreams. We now need to build so that we have 2 instances of Django, and then we can test to see if the split is working. So in the most quickest way possible, let's go ahead and just close down our containers, and then we just prune this. just get rid of all the containers and images, and then we can go back and now go ahead and go back. Oh, let's get rid of all this and get rid of that. And then we go for compose up. You don't need to build flag, but just compose up. That will go ahead and build our new containers and images. So what we should have now is we should have 4 images and 4 containers. So you can see what's happened here. We have web 1 and web 2. Now that does cause an issue in our configuration. So we need to change our configuration slightly to correspond to that. So if we go back into Nginx here, and then our configuration file at the moment, I think what we have, just bring that down, we have a reference point. Yep, so previously we named our service web up here, but we changed the names to web 1 and web 2. So we're using these names to kind of access the location of our server. So we just need to change that to web corresponding name. So web, I don't know what I can do that, web 1 and web 2. So we just need to make sure in our configuration we've set that as such so that it can find the correct container to actually send the data to. Okay, so everything looks like it's working okay. Just double check containers. Okay, let's just go ahead and run that. So that was the error, I'm assuming here. Invalid percentage value. Oh, okay, so let's go back into our configuration. Hopefully you saw the error earlier. I like to say that I do this on purpose to keep us on our toes, make a few mistakes. It makes it a little bit more interesting. We get to learn a little bit more about what's happening when there are errors, because the problem is here is I can make a tutorial and I can make it all work exactly how it's meant to the first time. But the problem is that not everyone is going to experience that. And by having problems, by simulating problems, it means that hopefully I'm able to give you a little bit more information and show you how you might do that. And of course, if you're not familiar with Docker, using the extensions here, there's a lot going on here potentially. So you can see that we use the percentage in the wrong place there. So it should be 50%. So with that in place, you can see that our container is still not up. We need to start that. And then hopefully this time it comes up. It does. And notice that it did give me all the information I needed. I just read what the problem was, invalid percentage value. So it does, majority of the time, direct us if there is a syntax error where it is, and potentially that makes it easier for us to fix. So with that in place, let's open up a new bash shell. Let's go ahead and see if we can send a message across. So one, you can see that we receive the the default page for Django because we're not actually in the right location, remember. So if you remember, what we had was a URL. We set up a URL in demo here to go to split test. So we need to now pass in split test / token1. Okay, so that doesn't seem to work very well. Looks like we're receiving a 404 page here. So let's make sure that we've got a question mark, and there we go. Okay, so now we're working. Right, so this is the URL that we're sending to, and you can see here we're returning variant 1 at the moment. So let's change our token, still variant 1, and now we're seeing variant 2. So we've just simulated the idea of using split test across 2 containers running Django. Of course, if you can't use curl, then you can definitely just type this into the browser. So give that a go, wherever the browser is, over here. So we can type it into the browser, and you can see variant 2, just change the token, and now we've got variant 1, variant 1, variant 1. See if we can get another variant 2. Come on. There we go. So there we have our baseline setup for split client module. Now, hopefully, like the other tutorials, we will loop through or iterate through again and add a little bit more detail and go into a little bit more depth with some of these tutorials. Happily take requests from you as to the direction of some of these different tutorials, but hopefully that's given you a baseline, like I said, how to utilize the split client. There is obviously a code base for you to practice and build upon. So thank you very much for listening if you have got this far, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial. So I'll finish off by thanking the members again. Thank you very much for your support. Please keep communicating with me in terms of what you'd like to see on this channel. Any comments, any support, any feedback is always very welcomed. If you would like to follow our channel further, or support, our channel further, you can do through the YouTube channel membership, or potentially follow us on Patreon. If that isn't for you, then please check out our socials, and then don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much.